Okay, you're live on YouTube and I will start admitting our guests.
Very well.
Right, I think all the Penrose people are in.
Very well. Then it now being 7 o'clock, I will call the regular meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals of the Town of Orleans to order. I am Michael P. Marnick, the chair of the zoning board, and with me are members Mulligan, Cole, Law, and Tom. Also present is Thomas Evers, the building commissioner of the Town of Orleans. Emily Van Giesen is expected to join the meeting as she is a regular member. Lynn Eckholt is excused from attendance. A quorum exists. We are considering case number 2146. That is the application of Penrose LLC for a comprehensive permit under General Laws, Chapter 40B. There have been two previous hearings on this application. At the conclusion of the last, there was a sounding of the sense of the board, and counsel for the applicant was requested to draft a decision with conditions, which was submitted and circulated to the board. Subsequently, I, on behalf of the board, modified that draft, and that was circulated to the members of the board and to council. I suggest that we consider that draft tonight, whether for adoption. It consisted of 8 pages with the conditions were contained on page 7. I have on Mr. Singer's draft was circulated to the board, and I received no comments orally or in writing from any members of the board on that draft, nor has there been any communication for the file from any interested parties on the application since the last hearing. And I have received, nor would I have expected to have received, any commentary on the my proposed decision. The form of the draft decision, I think, had contained redlining, and I thought I might ask how the redlining came to exist, Mr. Singer. I'm not really not sure of that. Those quite a few of those suggested edits were adopted. I
Was
just
that a question to me, Mr. Chairman?
the real question was the process by which you drafted the decision, and it came to us with redlining.
Yes, sir. I had Andrew Singer, for the record. After I sent the original decision, as lawyers tend to do, for all of those who are lawyers on this call, I went back and made some more suggested changes to tighten up some language. So I sent it to you as a red line just so that you would know and the board would know what I had done.
Okay, so that was really the result of not, well, at least two passes at the draft.
Correct.
All right. Now, have you seen the draft which I circulated?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any comments on it?
No specific comments.
Very well. Members of the board, this, I'll ask in circuit whether you have any comments. Mr. Mulligan?
The only comment I have, Mr. Chairman, is that when you incorporate into the document various plans, should we have some identifying dates or something to, because I think we had on a couple of occasions different plans. I was wondering if we should further identify them.
I thought that these were accurate, Mr. Mulligan. These were the most recent. In the case where there was one plan which was superseded, we had the most recent one. For example, the landscape plan, there was some tinkering and improvement to that as a result of the first hearing, and therefore the landscape plan, which is referred to and which was eventually received into evidence, was dated March 12th, which was after.
Right.
You see,
I'm just getting it up here now on my iPad. I didn't see that when I read it this afternoon, I didn't see the reference to the date on those plans.
almost every document referred to in the list contains a date, except those which were undated, which was the comment sheet from the Council on Aging and the Police Department's comment sheet was undated as well. Everything else seems to have a date, so it's tied down pretty well to the file, which will be maintained in the building department.
All right, thank you.
Does that, are you satisfied now?
It does, yes, thank you.
Mr. Cole, I and the board kind of rely upon you to make sure that those conditions are what we really talked about in the last, actually both areas.
I do think that the conditions talked about are captured in the document. I guess my only question that I had, I'd posed to Mr. Evers, which is, I think we've got all the documents tied down neatly. One of the concerns was about the amenities and the timing of those, which don't really relate to building code issues. So is there anything that either the certificate of occupancy process or any other part of the process that would confirm those elements as the project winds down?
I think some of that will be just through the site plan review process. And they have to meet what they brought before us.
So you issue an occupancy permit, whether there's a playground or a community garden or not, right?
Well, I'll issue it based on the documentation in the file, including the decision.
Okay, so tying all this down then does ensure that all of those elements get built.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think this is sufficient as written.
Very well. Let the record reflect that Emily Van Giesen has joined the meeting. Mr. Ward, you've been involved with your rich experience in previous comprehensive permits. What think you about the draft decision? Well, the decision which I circulated, I should say.
I think it's a well-done document and certainly satisfies, let's put it this way, 99% of the requirements that I can conceive of. I do have some minor questions, and I think that's what they are on what I do see. And if you want me to, I would go through what my specific questions are.
Would you please?
Okay, the first one would be, I was wondering, since this was a process that was done by Zoom, should that be indicated in some portion, perhaps of the beginning of the meeting, since Zooming is maybe indicative of a problem in the past or the future? So I would suggest or ask you if we should annotate the beginning to indicate that these meetings were held by Zoom.
Yes, absolutely. I shall make that change. That is, there's a boilerplate clause, which we've seen in other decisions, and that will be inserted in the first paragraph as to all.
Okay. Then obviously, about at the end of that portion, you will have to indicate who the voting members are. I think that was left open on certainly the one I have.
Yes, I intend to designate all members present tonight to vote on the application.
On page 3, I was questioning whether or not, although we list the specific number of units that are affordable and working force units, should there be extracted from the proposal what the percentage, AMI, I think is the word, would be required for some of those units?
Mr. Singer, you have do you understand the question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Per the financing tax credit process and the proposal, the 25%, a minimum of 25% of the units will be deed restricted at 80% AMI, and that's 16 of the units. The remainder will be affordable under the tax credit program and then the workforce units. You could certainly add a sentence that a minimum of 25% of the units shall be affordable at 80% AMI if you would like.
Yes, I thought they all were portioned on that number. We're indicating there are different groups of units. So if it's the 52 and the 10 are different, then I think we should indicate that. That's what I'm trying to get to. I think you basically said you would just do one portion of them. I'm saying, should all of these that are categorized be defined by their AMI percentage?
For 40B purposes, through the chair, the only thing that's required to be placed in the comprehensive permit decision is referencing the minimum of 25%. The my understanding is the remainder of the percentages are covered through the final project eligibility process and the tax credit process. And I see Mr. Adams nodding his head and Ryan, so I said that correctly. So what could be added here, Mr. Wall, would be to reference the 25%, which would be in compliance with 40B. The other references later in the document to DHCD and the project eligibility letter would cover everything else.
Thank you. That would be fine if everybody else agrees.
That means that in line 5, the sentence ending with the words "the 3 buildings," the following sentence would be inserted. A minimum of 25% of the units will be affordable at 80% AMI. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
I think it would be, I agree with you. I think it's appropriate to show that the project meets what is required to do without, unless there's some other consideration, changing the percentage to something higher than it is required. Is that, are you all right now, Mr. Wall?
Yes.
You have something else?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Continuing on down that page, there is the statement, the on-site septic system will be discontinued and the redevelopment will connect to town sewer. I understand that's, my only concern is that I think it should be, and it probably is realized, that there's a lot of criteria that the town, excuse me, has imposed on these connections. The design of the connection to basically the sewer system has to be approved by the town. The determination of who is going to do the construction has to be approved by the town, et cetera. I think there is a document that's in existence. It's called the Property Owner's Guidebook that indicates all these. So in some fashion, I just would like to make sure that it's understood, and maybe one simple statement, if somebody can figure out how to say it, would say that the septic system will be discontinued and connected in accordance with, the town of Orleans sewer requirements. Because that also gets into some financial issues with basically the connection costs, betterments, etc., which I think you'd be eligible to pay.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I think Mr. Wah's suggestion is fine in adding at the end of that, it's that sentence that the on-site septic system will be discontinued and the redevelopment will connect to the town sewer, which has just been installed on West Road, adding at the end in accordance with town of Orleans requirements.
That's what I was thinking. Is that okay, Mr. Waugh?
I think that would answer the question, yes. Okay. The other question I have is, I guess maybe because I don't understand it, I think it was on my page 4. The applicant shall perform property management services in-house, etc. And then, or with a professional property management company with affordable housing properties if handled by a third party. Maybe you could just elucidate what that really means. I mean, I think I understand, but I'm just not sure. You got where I am?
Would Mr. Adams, would you like to address that?
Sure. Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chairman. I think the secretary firm is the condition that we would have a property management firm that would either be ourselves or a third party. That's the question. Like, what does that mean? Is that? Yeah. So we will manage this. We will have a professional manager. Our intent is to have our own property management company operate the property. At the end of the day, in terms of the way these deals are structured, that property management company will have a contract with the ownership entity of the partnership, which will own the deal. And that contract has to be approved by all the funders and investors. And it's subject to their agreeing that we can continue to manage that property. And that contract gets renewed. It's our desire to continue to have our property management. But if our lenders and investors feel we're not doing an adequate job, they would require us to bring in another third-party management company that would replace us and do the job. So I think that's what that's getting at. So we don't have 100% control over that. Obviously, it's our preference, but ultimately the investor, has the ability to tell us if it's not being managed the right way.
Okay, so I guess the big word for me there is or, so it's either you or somebody else is going to be
Yeah,
doing. You would subcontract to them. Okay.
But for the record, we've, all the deals I've done, it's always been our property management company. It's never been an issue. The investor and lender prefers that we do it. So, but it is a formal contract with the partnership. So.
And further on down the page, this is sort of another question. I think perhaps, Mr. Merrick, I don't know if where there are subsidies involved, it's been defined before. Is that something that should be indicated in the decision as to the amount of the subsidy from the individual groups? Because I noticed that it's going to we're going to get one from Department of Housing and Community Development, et cetera. And I think we're talking millions of dollars. So I don't know if it's appropriate that those amounts of subsidies should be defined in the decision.
I don't think so. I really don't think so.
Okay.
That we ought to leave with, even though we have expanded powers under Chapter 40B, because we're the only stop on the bus line. You've got the Department of Housing and Community Development. You've got a separate agreement that of which I'm completely ignorant, but I suspect that the community benefits agreement or memorandum of understanding with the town of Orleans takes care of all of that. What is particularly powerful about this project is that by, if it's approved, then Orleans has met its 10% figure. It's something which has been lacking for a long, long time, many years. So that's my thinking. I'll subject to any comments from my colleagues. I'm not so sure it's subsurface, George, I think, to some extent, but maybe not quite our business.
It was more of a question and
Yep.
I accept your answer. Thank you. Mike,
Do you have any other suggestions?
just one more.
Okay.
Under waivers, I think it would be appropriate in this particular case where they're asking for waivers of a specific requirement. They're listing the requirement, but it would be good to know what the extent of that waiver is. For example, where the maximum building height is 40 feet proposed, I think it's appropriate to indicate what is defined as being required, what they're doing, or the planned amount of height, so that we could indicate, okay, we're waiving a 40-foot requirement and what they're going to be putting in is 50 feet. And all the way down that list, I think there's 5 of them. Each one of those should be potentially addressed in that fashion, so we know what the requirement is and what they're proposing and what we're waiving.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, to address that,
Yes, please.
that's actually, Mr. Wall, what is there. So what is shown there are the waivers. So for example, the height requirement is 30, we're requesting 40. The density, it lists, so what is shown there is actually what the waiver is. It's exactly what you had just said. That's what we put in there. So all those numbers are the waivers, specific waivers that you would be granting.
Would it be clearer to anybody in the future who's reading it to indicate the maximum building height then was X and we're proposing Y 40? If it's 30 and we're proposing 40, we can somebody could easily see that. That's just another question as to clarity in what has been waived and the amount of it.
It certainly could be added. The thinking had been on the model is that by referencing the specific sections of the zoning bylaw and the other town requirements, that's where those requirements are listed. So they're publicly available.
Understand. I'll go to my colleagues' opinion on that. I'm open to putting it in or to not putting it in as they determine. No more.
Well, I'm the drafter and I'd prefer not to have to go back to the existing zoning bylaw and put in what the limits are. But I will if that's the sense of the word.
No, I would yield.
Very well. A footnote. The section, the lengthy section 2, entitled "The Hearings and Findings," is quite expanded from previous 40B decisions that have been prepared by the zoning board in Orleans. The narrative is helpful in that it does describe for public examination the full ramification of the project, and all of this was established by evidence in the 2 hearings, so they are also findings. In certain cases, I think that previous boards may have taken some of those findings, the more significant ones, for example, and inserted them and made them conditions. For example, Mr. Cole did discuss on least and received responses from the applicant on 2 hearings concerning the construction of the siding on the existing structure and also the 2 new townhomes. That was a sentence which was contained in the findings in Mr. Singer's draft, which I extracted and made it a condition because there was enough of a discussion, I felt, that it ought to be honored. And I'm not really sure whether Mr. Cole insisted on a condition, but it certainly, there is a very gray line between the finding, which the applicant said would represent to the board and the town that we're gonna do this, and making it a condition, which makes it, adds another element of strength. But I thought that the board ought to know the thinking process of myself as the draftsman when we came down to the short strokes in the past few days. Mr. Singer, did you have an objection to recording the decision at the Registry of Deeds?
No objection. It has to be recorded with the Registry of Deeds.
Very well. I thought that was probably a simpler way of stating rather than that runs with the land, whatever that is. That's an
That's
old
fine.
legal expression that I always thought was kind of foolish.
If I might also say, Mr. Chairman, your relocation of that finding as a condition about the siding is perfectly fine with the applicant.
Well, I just wanted to explain to my colleagues the thinking process between the narrative of the findings and what could have been a condition. The fact of the matter is, if you as the applicant at least 2 occasions and on many other occasions with other town boards have expressed what you expect to do, and there's no one that doubts that you're going to do it. So, but making it a condition, the board isn't really skeptical that you're not going to do it. Ms. Van Giesen, do you have any comments on the draft that's before us tonight?
No, Mr. Chairman, no comments.
Very well. And Mr. John?
On page 4, just in case somebody misses it, there's a time that needs to be entered. I just call that folks' notice. On the conditions page, I wondered if we wanted more specificity on number 2 and number 3. In number 2, it says construction in accordance with these plans as submitted. I just don't know how many various sets of plans were submitted, when submitted. It was too vague as a casual reader, but perhaps I'm over analyzing. And I had the same concern about number 3, where the applicant shall enter into. I mean, this is clearly a condition, but is it something we want to hold open forever, or is there an end date on it that we want to establish? That's it for me.
Is that the date that you meant on page 4?
No, sir.
Well, I need to know that first.
Okay, on page 4 on my copy, Mr. Marnick, in the middle of the page, it says on March 17th, 2021 at -PM. Sorry, we could have done this one offline.
No.
It's near the bottom of page 5 of your draft, Mr. Marnick.
Ooh.
I'm still not seeing any, what time.
It is in the very long section 2, hearings and findings.
Okay,
And if you scroll down a considerable amount on the left-hand side, at least a page down, a paragraph, a sentence begins on March 17, 2021.
Oh,
Sorry.
that now reads on March 17, 2021. The chairman closed the hearing for the taking of public testimony.
Good enough for me.
So,
Done.
okay,
And
Now-
then
you're a more serious, more interesting comments relative to the conditions. I think that Mr. Mulligan asked earlier whether the list of documents they were tied down enough by an insertion or an inclusion of a date for each of the documents. And with the exception of two documents, which were relatively minor, we determined that the site plans, landscape plan, all had dates which were the last of the submissions, if there were a series of them. And I think that's, I suggest to you that ties down the building inspector and the applicant pretty well.
I'm satisfied.
Very well. And I don't know that this is similar to a previous remark on the arrangements between the applicant and the state. Seems to me, I think that it's all to the applicant's integral benefit to make that deal, and that's probably the sooner the better. That probably ties in with a whole lot of other factors allowing the financing to be committed and the application to the construction to be done. Is that a fair way of putting it, Mr. Singer?
That is absolutely correct. We have to do all of those documents in order to be able to take the next step.
Yeah, in other words, the condition is something that is quite benign is from the applicant's point of view, because they're going to have to do that to get the dough or to be blunt.
Correct. We can't proceed without doing that.
Now, I have, Bruce, do you have any other?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Singer, I got on condition number 5. I wonder whether what does maximum local preference allowable by law for the affordable home buyer lottery? When we're not, that was appropriate in some cases where the housing in the project was to result in a sale towards to certain home buyers who were first-time home buyers or otherwise limited by their income. I don't know if that really fits in here quite right.
There may be a word error on my part, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask Mr. Adams or Mr. Karakofi. It says the maximum local preference allowable by law for the affordable home buyer lottery. Should that just, gentlemen, say the home renter lottery?
Yeah, that sounds like a vestige. Home buyer probably should not be referenced. Let me speak, if I could, Mr. Chairman, speak generally about that preference. So what we will do on behalf of the town, because that's what I think the preference has been, is that we will advocate for a 65% preference for Orleans residents for the first year. That would be consistent with what was done in Eastham. And then on top of that, we would ask for a 10% preference for all of the Cape, given that some other communities are planning to invest in this project, like Eastham and Wellfleet, and we're going to some other communities. That was what DHCD agreed to on Eastham. We don't have any control over that, so that's why it would be up to, and maybe we could clarify, up to 65% rather than the maximum. We don't have any control over whether or not ultimately we can get that. It's really a facts and circumstances analysis that DHCD will do. It's based on fair housing, and they'll look at the demographics of the community and the demographics of the town and determine if that's acceptable to go to that high percentage. But we have not been in the other communities that we've done this work. We have not been denied those requests. But again, it's outside our control, so I can't guarantee it.
Okay, then how say you if we delete the words "for the affordable home buyer lottery"?
I think that probably makes sense. If someone could read it to me, I think if we just get rid of the home buyer, we have to do a lottery. Maybe just say lottery rather than home buyer, because there is no ownership here.
Okay,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I think we probably should include the word lottery, just so it's clear that everybody knows there has to be a lottery. That might be helpful.
it helps me a lot.
Yeah.
So the way it works is you're going to, Department of Housing and Community Development is going to set a percentage, and based on that percentage, you're going to have a lottery and place the tenants. Is that?
Yeah, we have to have a lottery regardless of what the percentage is, but we have to have a lottery, and we'll try to give we will request a 65% preference for Orleans, and it would cover Orleans residents, employees who work in the town but don't live in the town, and it would include families whose children go to school in Orleans but don't necessarily live in the town.
So we're deleting the two words home buyer, and that does it?
Why don't we add, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
why don't we just add allowable by the law for the tenant lottery?
Okay.
Yeah, I would prefer to put the 65% in there, so it's clear that that's what we're trying to get. That we would look for a 65% preference.
Well, that's fine, Mr. Adams, but now we stop doing that. Now you're tying yourself down.
Well, it also ties
Up
us
to.
down too.
Up to.
Up to 65%
For
local preference.
then it would be for local preference,
Allowable by law with a
Allow-
tenant lottery.
allowed by law for the tenant lottery. Now for local preference up to 65%. I prefer not to have the 65% figure.
I agree with that, Mr. Chairman, too. I think that ties us.
Right. So
us
the
down.
reason why we're doing 65 is in some cases you can go up to 70, but in this case, because we're getting money from other towns, the conversations I've had with Selectmen and other folks is to do 65% and then the 10% preference overall for the Cape, which actually allows you to go over the 75 in total, which they were able to do in Eastham, and they don't usually do that.
So it's not
So
the
that's-
maximum. So it's not the maximum local preference.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Up to 65 with 10 then for the entire Cape. That will allow this project to try to get funds, other CPC funds from other towns to help with this project.
Then I need a suggestion of how to word this condition.
Well, let me just ask where that leaves us if you don't get permission to do 65%.
I'm sorry.
That leaves us with the quandary of what if you don't get permission to go up to 65%, or you choose because of other towns not to go to 65%. It looks like we're conditioning this on a 65% local preference. And if conditions change or you don't get the approval, it looks like we've been hoodwinked.
I think that's why he's asking for it to say up to 65%, right? To have flexibility up to that threshold.
And the language, Mr. Mulligan, says shall request approval from DHCD. So we're
Yeah.
not trying to bind your hands or ours on it's not allowed, but that condition says the applicant shall request approval from DHCD for, and we're discussing what the for will be.
All right, so going back to Mr. Adams' point, then you're not going to give other towns some preference. the 65% you're going to commit to that.
So what we would, so we can't give any other towns preference. The DHCD will not allow other towns to have any preference. What they were willing to do on the Eastham deal was to give an overall 10% preference for the entire Cape. So in actuality, if you think that, if you follow that logic, you actually are getting, you're actually getting a larger percentage because Orleans is part of the Cape. So you're getting sort of two whacks at it.
Yeah, right. All right.
So I think to Mr. As Mr. Singer said, what we're committing to is we will send a request asking for up to 65%. So that's how you have protection, that we're not going to turn around and ask for only 50. We're going to ask for 65.
Okay. Thank you. I got it.
I was in the condition 5 going to read. I have it. The applicant shall request approval from DHCD for local preference allowable by law for the tenant lottery.
You're dropping the 65%.
Yeah, I don't know how to insert it.
Well, you'd say the applicant shall request approval from the Department of Housing and Community Development for a 65% local preference.
Is that
Up
the
to
affordable-
65%.
Up to 65. Why is it up to? If you're committing to 65 here, you're applying for 65. You might not get it.
Yeah, so I think maybe we're mixing apples. If you're asking us just to ask for it, then we can say the applicant will ask for 65%. What we can't commit to is what they'll give us. So we can commit to asking.
We can't ask you to commit to someone else's decision.
Right. Yeah,
But if we're asking you to commit to up to 65, not up to 65% local preference for the tenant lottery.
Yeah, I think that works, right? Yeah,
Okay.
we'll submit a request.
So the town of Orleans, by this comprehensive permit, is asking you to make an application to have a 65% local preference. We'd like that if you can get it. But you're going to
Yes.
apply for that. And see
We're going to
what-
apply for that.
Okay.
And I'm feeling confident we can get it.
If you're saying 65, is there any wiggle room? I mean, it seems to me the proper language is up to. I still think that's correct. You're going to strive to get 65%. If you say it must be 65% and you don't get it, does that preclude other towns from
He's committing
getting
to apply. He's committing to apply for 65%. He's not committing to 65. He's committing that he's requesting 65%. And if he doesn't get it, he doesn't get it. But he's lived up to his commitment to us. He can't commit to 65 if it's not his decision.
My question is still, if that's what it says, if it says specifically 65%, and Orleans determines by lottery or whatever fashion, we only get 50% of our own people into these things, does that preclude anybody from getting the other 15%? Because you've said we are only up to 65. We have to hold up to that number. That's what you're guaranteeing. If you say up to 65, then if we can't rent them to our people, then other people can come in from other areas, according to that and what you just said, for the rest of the Cape to fill the place up. I mean, it seems to me what you're really trying to do is fill up those units. And we want to get as many Orleans people as possible, but we don't want to come up with wording that will preclude it. I mean, so that's just the way I would read what you were saying.
Well, if you're asking them to apply up to 65, that implies that what they're applying for, the maximum they can get is 65 for Orleans. That's what they have authorization to offer as preference. If they don't get 65% applicants in a number of 65, that's not apples and oranges. They have authority to go up to 65.
Up to says the same thing rather than just a raw number. Raw numbers are funny. Up to seems to me to cover what we're talking about. 65 to me seems to be very specific.
That's what they're committing to. Up to means they can commit to less. Up to, they can go in and apply for 50%. If it's up to 65, they can apply for any number up to 65. It's a cap and not what they're offering to us is much better than that. They're offering a commitment to apply for 65%, not up to 65, not 50, not 55, but 65%. And I think they're looking to get from the state the maximum authority they can give for local residents. And I think it's stronger for Orleans to commit to that number, not up to that number. I may be misunderstanding, but
No.
am I misunderstanding, Mr. Singer?
No, Mr. Mulligan, what you're saying is correct. And to Mr. Waugh's point, if we've asked for 65% and there's only 50% of Orleans residents that apply who qualify, then the rest of the units would be rented in compliance with this requirement, with the comprehensive permit and the state requirements. Units would not go unrented because of it.
Okay, I'll accept that. Fine.
But Mr. Chairman.
I don't want to breach of condition. That's what I'm concerned with. After, this is all after construction stuff. We don't want to breach, if this is going to be worded correctly. I understand and what Mr. Mulligan's saying, and I just would want to avoid a breach of a condition because we didn't word this correctly. I think we're all in understanding of how it operates.
What they're offering us is the maximum they can offer the town. And I think we have to accept the maximum for the town. That's if we try to accept some other number, and if we turn them down and say, well, up to 65 or some number close to 65, they're offering us the best deal they can for the town, and we have the obligation to take it, I think.
I think if they're saying we're going to shoot for this, and that's fine.
Yeah, they shoot for that. That's the maximum they can shoot for. And if they don't get it because of the state's action, they don't get it. But they tried, and that was the commitment they made to the town, and we accepted that commitment.
Condition 5 then therefore shall read, I propose to everyone, the applicant shall request approval from Department of Housing and Community Development for 65% local preference allowable by law for the tenant lottery.
No, I think you drop out allowable by law. You just
Okay.
say for the tenant lottery.
Okay, is that all right? I think so. I'll repeat it one last time. Condition 5 shall now read, the applicant shall request approval from Department of Housing and Community Development for 65% local preference for the tenant lottery. Sound okay?
I think that does it, Mr. Chairman, yeah.
I don't hear it. I hear no objection. Very well. That was it. That was the only thing that troubled me because I think that that may have been the residue of a guide that I gave to you, Mr. Singer, and that somehow or other it passed through relative to home buyers, which is not what's happening here. Any other comments from my colleagues? There's no response.
I would move approval of the acceptance of this decision, approval of the decision.
Then Mr. Mulligan moves that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant the application for a comprehensive permit based on the details specified in the documents.
As modified this evening. I'll second it.
As modified this evening. And a second by Mr. Cole. Is there any discussion on the motion? then we will proceed to a vote by, I've lost the word.
Roll
By
call.
polling the board. Mr. Marnick, yes. Mr. Mulligan,
Yes,
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Waugh,
Yes,
Ms. Van Giesen,
Yes.
and Mr. Todd.
Yes.
And the motion carries unanimously. I will make the change and Ms. Van Giesen and I will sign the decision. Is there any necessity or is anyone looking for the final draft to be circulated? We've done the deal now. This comprehensive permit will issue.
We need a second and separate motion for the permit. Was the prior simply to adopt those findings? I just want to make sure we get all the procedure correct to tie a bow on this.
Very well. I didn't have that.
Point of order, Mr.
The
Chairman.
findings are, yes,
I thought I heard the motion that Mr. Mulligan said, and you talked to grant the comprehensive permit
yes.
based on the approval. I don't know if that
Okay.
helps.
Okay, thank you.
I think that the findings, Mr. Cole, I think the findings are adopted in the decision.
Okay,
I
great.
think that's sufficient. Very well. Does the applicant have any further comments?
Want to thank you all very much for your time and efforts.
Yes. I second that. I'll second that motion. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And we appreciate all the feedback as well to, make sure that the project gets a good foot off the ground. So we appreciate it.
Very well. Then, is there any further business to come before the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one, nothing to do with this application at all, just the technology tonight. When I opened your email this morning, I read the decision, it had all red lines on it, and that was the basis of my question. And now I opened it tonight, and I can't get that copy. How did that happen?
What happened is there was earlier version, which Stacy Faber circulated to all of us, was sourced from Mr. Singer.
Right.
By accommodation, I provided with Mr. Singer, who was well familiar with preparing draft decisions for comprehensive permits, with a one or two versions of decisions adopted by this board in history, one of which extended.
No, my question is nothing to do with that. Just very technically, somehow the document that I had on my iPad has disappeared and it has been replaced by a formal decision without the redlining.
Yeah, because I took all the red lines out. I took the earlier draft, and then I accepted quite a few of the changes, modified others, and ended up with something that you would be able to read without being distracted by earlier edits.
So you changed the Word document and somehow that got replaced on my iPad? Because I didn't know some technology. I don't know what happened.
Well, there should have been two documents. One was the draft, Mr. Singer's draft, and one was mine. And mine had no redlining. I was careful to eliminate and accept changes and so forth. Then, technologically speaking, yes, there's a real problem in 21st century editing when there are hands all working by a committee on one document.
I don't know that somehow the redlining disappeared and this other one is in its place. I don't know how that happened, but be that as it may, it's nothing. I'm sorry to tie everybody up.
Very well. Maybe you like a refresher in Microsoft Word.
No, I haven't. I think somehow, forget it.
Very well.
What about the possibility of Google Docs to make life more complicated?
Oh, yeah, no.
No, because it really is an advance. Anyhow, good night all. Thank
Very
you.
well. We have motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Very well. Second.
Just in time for Hemingway, the third
Very
part.
well. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everybody. Good work.
everyone.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All your